Hi, Keith. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Now you know a little bit about me, so it's time for our audience to get to know a little bit more about you. Joining me is Keith Ajmani. He is the VP of Platform Engineering and Transformation at Interac. So, let's give him a round of applause with those emojis, everyone. Welcome, Keith. Thank you so much for joining
Great.
us. Now, before we dive in a little more on the recruitment and sort of how to make your application and that interview stand out as a candidate, I'm hoping
hmm
you can introduce yourself, share a little bit about your career and how you got to Interact.
For sure. Yeah, I did an undergrad in engineering, U of T, and worked in a variety of technology startups after that, and then progressed into sort of larger companies, ending up eventually in financial services, working for some big banks, and gravitated towards the payment space. And I had a chance to work with Interac in a couple of different ways. I worked with them as where they were my client. I was working at CGI, and so I was providing services to them. And then I spent about 7 years working at banks between TD and RBC, and so I was their customer. So when the opportunity came up to kind of be in the center, the middle of the sandwich, I guess to compare to the food from earlier, I jumped at the chance to go and see what it was like to be in the center of the ecosystem. So that's sort of been my journey with a whole skew to payments in the end and technology throughout.
That's great. So, a natural transition for you to join the Interact
Yeah.
family. That's great. One of the things I always like to know when it comes to people's career journey is were there any habits or, I guess, any skills that you really honed or adopted that sort of helped maybe break through or take you to that next step in your career? If there's any that you can share with us, we'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two things really stand out. One is deliberately working and to develop my network and keep in touch with people. It's not necessarily something that comes naturally to me to go out and make connections to people. So I kind of forced myself into that. But I can tell you, except for one, every job offer, every opportunity I've ever had has come through my network from a colleague, someone from university, from a friend. It's all come through my network. Companies will tell you from a referral process, you get the best that way. And so that's been one to deliberately develop the network. And the second would be, sticking to my values and my passions in terms of the work, the culture of the company that I work in, the technology that I work with, and the business space that I work within. You can kind of chase the next exciting job or interesting job that might be interesting, or maybe you're chasing pay, but ultimately, you've got to have work that resonates with you. And so for me, I've kind of learned over my career, stick with the work that excites you.
That's some great advice. Do you have any mentors or anyone that you personally leaned on or really gave you some great advice, throughout your career that you could share with our audience as well?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let me just think. In general, I think, yeah, there's a gentleman I worked with back when I was at TD, and I think what I learned from him is just being very honest, being very open. So I think, there's many different cultures out there in companies, and his advice, I'd say, was really just to be yourself in what you do. And they say this a lot in businesses now, bring your true self to work, which wasn't at all maybe the mantra 10 years ago in a lot of companies. But I think if you're not doing that, if you're not bringing who you are, then you're ultimately not going to be happy, right? So if you
Yeah.
have to force yourself to adapt, to try and to the previous conversation, to force yourself into a culture, versus it adapting a bit to you or you adapting to it. Sorry, don't adapt to it. Then you're not going to be happy ultimately.
Right. And before we go a little bit further into the recruitment side of things, mentors can obviously influence how we choose to lead teams. How would you describe your leadership style for everyone joining us tonight?
For sure, I'd say I'm a trust first kind of person. So I'm going to work with someone. I'm going to assume they're capable in their role, that they're committed to the best interests of the team and the company, versus prove it to me before I give you a chance, right? So I'll start from a basis of trust and belief that you can do what you're going to do. The other piece, I think it's a good thing, is I'm quite transparent. With me, you kind of, what you see is what you get, not in a confrontational, like calling somebody out on something, but generally what I say is what I feel. There's not a filter, there's not an angle. And I think those aspects lead to a much more solid foundation of relationship for people if it's based on trust and transparency. So those are probably my two, I think, hallmarks, I guess.
Trust and transparency. Those are two great ones to take away. Um, I imagine everyone joining us is very familiar with Interac.
Hope
One
so.
thing they might not be too familiar with is just the culture and sort of the
Yeah.
dynamic of the team. So could you speak a little to what it's like to work for Interac and that culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting company. We're a fintech, but we're a very well-funded fintech. We're owned by the banks, and so that that helps us give us opportunities. That means it's a really great place to work. It is. I was surprised. I've been here about a year and a half. It's a very employee-centric company. Salaries are competitive. The benefits are better than I had at banks, to be very honest. But just so much of the conversations around what's right for the employees and what's right for the people and supporting the employees, like surprisingly so. Um, and I think that aspect, just give an example, someone mentioned earlier, COVID and mental health. You mentioned it just in your intro, mental like and health in general. One thing we've just done is double the mental health benefits to $1,000 per employee and each of their dependents per year. So, I think that is probably one of the most permeating things about Interac is just the sense about the employees. We have all the other good things like fairly casual dress. We're right downtown with a great view of the city. We have parental leave for people who welcome newborns to their family, tuition reimbursement. So quite a lot to sort of be above and beyond the fulfillment of the role itself.
Definitely very important and something great to highlight as well. Switching gears a little bit more to the developers that might be joining us tonight,
Yep.
speaking towards maybe those types of roles, what could they expect to work on, to be working with, and could you speak to the tech stack as well?
For sure, yeah. So if I talk first about some of the products, like I do hope most people know who Interac is. We're one of the most trusted brands in Canada. E-transfer, obviously, we provide, which tons of people use to either send or receive money from your parents, perhaps in the past. We run the debit network for Canada. If you're paying with your debit card at point of sale, or if you're taking money out of a bank machine, we run the bank machine network. Those are probably what you know us for. But in terms of other things you could work on, we're really engaged in the evolving field of digital identity in Canada. You may have seen there was a big announcement last month about us purchasing a company called SecureKey, and that's allowed us to really expand even further. We had previously acquired another company from Ottawa called Two Keys, also in the security and authentication space. So we're sort of branching out from just payments into identity, authentication, and authorization of folks. So there's an opportunity there. And then we're very active in the emerging space of open banking. So there's regulation coming, the world is changing, it's been happening overseas. And so, being at the nexus of payments and banking in Canada gives us a really unique opportunity. So that's the product space. From the tech stack as well is quite modern, I'd say. We're not complete bleeding edge, but we're quite modern. So, I mean, it's Java, Spring Boot, Angular. We do a little bit of Node.js. I'd say we're much more back-end centric. So while there is some customer facing, and we're doing more of that as we move into the digital identity space in terms of mobile application development, it's an emerging space for us on the front end. And then we also are, but on the back end side, all the tech jargon, but I'll blurt it out for everybody. All the apps are Dockerized. We're running on Kubernetes. We use full service mesh technology. We use a mix of on-prem and public cloud because we do have some of our products are regulated by the government, and in some cases the government's not comfortable with public cloud, but we have on-premise cloud that has many of the same IaaS and PaaS capabilities as you would see on public cloud. Doing event streaming, we're looking at distributed NoSQL. We're using distributed NoSQL databases and some traditional relational databases like Oracle. I think what's interesting about that work in the tech space is just it is super high performance, super high availability, right? We're doing thousands and thousands of transactions per second. There's no tolerance for any downtime on e-transfer or on the debit network. It has to work. That means it's a 24/7 operation. There are always people working. There's always people monitoring. There's no one ever, well, people sleep, but someone's always awake throughout the day. And so it's a very different scale of operation when you have that kind of pace of payments. And then obviously you can't get it wrong, right? You're doing payments. People are paying mortgages. People are paying their rent. People are paying for childcare. People are, paying small businesses through the platform. So it's got to be reliant and robust.
Absolutely. People need their money and that has to
Yes,
be
they do, and
reliable.
they get very
Yes.
upset if it's not there. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for going in depth with that. Now, another question that we hear often from candidates is they want to know about internal growth opportunities, mentorship opportunities. Is there the ability to lean on senior leaders and have them help you with those growth strategies and tactics? Could you speak to Interact's, growth initiatives and how they're helping teams really go to the next level in their career?
Yeah, absolutely. Like from a new hire perspective, we have a buddy program that connects you sort of on a peer level with someone help to get you organized. Mentorship, formally, we've started in the last year a women's employee resource group, so specifically created on mentorship of women at Interac. And so we have virtual chat. It's all virtual now, of course, initiative where people can get paired up and meet at random and do a virtual meeting. We also have had, and I've seen this change over my 1 year at Interact, so far a year and a half, diversity and inclusion is a huge focus area, and we run a bi-monthly lunch service, bi-monthly lunch service, bi-monthly lunch meeting with some of the senior executive team speaking. And there's actually an opportunity to connect then after that with the senior execs and get some one-on-one coaching. But I'd say as well, like, and this has been nice coming back to a smaller firm. We know we're about 400 or 500 people. Coming from RBC, 88,000 people, or TD, I was before, 95,000 people. 400 is a lot different, and so the access to coaching and the access to just ad hoc conversation is so easy.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a question for our CEO, I text him, right? And so it's just very different than all the layers. And so I think it's a great thing, the accessibility. There's always some layers and hierarchy to an organization, but it's very accessible and open. So I think that's a great part of it. And from you asked about development, we have great investment in personal training, development, conferences, all those good things as
Mm-hmm.
well.
That's great. And that's certainly something that people can take away and would really find positive to learn. You did mention that some of these conversations, or most of them, are still happening virtually. So from
Yes.
your perspective, what does Interact look like post-pandemic in terms of working environment, whether that's hybrid or more in person? If you can share your perspective, how that looks.
Yeah, we're definitely going to land in some form of a hybrid model. It's not going to be 100% remote, but it's certainly no one's going back in our space 100% in person. I think what's been great about that process is it's been very collaborative and consultative with the employees. We ran surveys, we asked people what they wanted, and like overwhelmingly, nobody wants to go back 100%. So we know it's going to be a different way of working from the leadership down. They've acknowledged that, and we have to reflect the interests of our employee base, right, and what they want to do. And so actually to build the new model, again, it wasn't a top-down one. We built a working committee, an advisory committee with a diverse slate of employees from across all levels and areas of the organization to say, what does that new way of working look like? So we don't know yet. We're not all the way there, but it's going to be certainly a model that gives people a lot of freedom to choose where they work, when they work, as long as they can meet the objectives of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, we've been 100% remote now for 18 months. Your e-transfers are still going through. Your debit cards still work. So we're clearly got something working in that space. So we're really on that path, and I think it'll be all about having a model that works for employees and just all the new ways we've all adapted to working and living.
Yeah, and I
I
think
will
you
be
said it
going back a
best.
little bit, but not 100%.
No, that's great, and I think you said it best with having that flexibility. I think that's
Yeah.
that's very key for a lot of people, especially those entertaining, potentially going back into the office again. Having that flexibility is very important. Um,
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit more to maybe some advice, and hoping that you can share just from your perspective how people can really stand out, how they can make their application stand out, things like that. What do you look for on a resume, and to you, what really catches your eye when you just see a really great resume?
A couple of things. I'll probably scan it in a couple of dimensions. I'd be looking at from the dimension of technologies they've worked with for sure, because that needs to be a match. So I'm looking from like a developer or technologist or architect perspective. But I'll also look at how people describe what they've done in terms of the impact they've had and the work that they've done, right? If you just list, I use these 5 technologies and I did some projects, you're going probably in the bin, right? So what was impactful? It doesn't mean you ran the whole project, but what was your role? What did you learn? the standard sort of accomplishments and outcomes. Those are really important because that gives me a sense of what you did other than reading your title and the technologies that you use. So those stand out. And I still look, I don't know if people still do this, I still look at, outside interests, right? People say, oh, don't put on. But I mean, you want to get a sense that people are well-rounded and have interests outside of work. So I would look at that aspect of a resume too. And I do look at it being sort of maybe a little old school, but well articulated, well written. So I would just say if you're writing it, make sure, get a friend to read over it with like fresh eyes that's never seen it before. Not your partner, not your spouse. They won't tell you the truth. Get your friend, the friend who will be honest with you when like your clothes don't match or when you're being an idiot. Get that friend to read through and be brutally honest with you, and get them to read it through. Don't have spelling errors. Don't have grammar errors. Be sharp on it.
Perfect. So someone that is going to be honest with you, get
Yes.
them, take a look. That is great advice. Jason mentioned when he was speaking earlier about the identifying your strengths and weaknesses. But what's a question that you like to hear and you wish candidates asked more in an interview?
It's a good one. And I actually always lead this in an interview just so they know they can ask it if they want, but they don't all do, which is like, tell me what you'd like to know that maybe I wouldn't have planned to tell you about the company, about the opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, it's always a big sell job on the way in, but it's an employee market right now. In technology, it is your market. That's why we're all here tonight. And so don't be shy to ask about, what needs to be better? What are some of the challenges the you can phrase it in a nice way. What are the challenges you're addressing? How are you trying to change as an organization? What are opportunities for things to do better at the company? Because, you're getting into a new gig, so you shouldn't be shy to ask a little bit and probe a little bit about the organization. Is there clarity on the vision? Do they have a strategy? Do you know, as the person interviewing me, do you know where the company wants to be in 3 years? If they can't answer that, maybe there's a management communication gap inside the company that would be concerning. So you take the chance to probe. Like if you don't get a chance if you don't get a chance as a candidate to ask a question during an interview, then you kind of got to wonder how the company's going to treat you. I would say Absolutely. You should always have that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So doing the research ahead of time for someone who wants to prepare and come in with those great questions, where can they learn more about Interac and also the jobs you're currently hiring for?
So interac.ca. If I have it, I'll put it in the chat there. We have an actual technologist-centric portal for hiring. So it's all there. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all those wonderful things. I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best from a professional perspective. I don't really know what we do on Instagram. And if you also go to our site, Interac, we not only do we have the job postings on the Development Center, and you can find out about the products on the Interac site and Interac in the Know. But if you want to know what it's really like as an employee, or decently filtered view of what it's like as an employee, there's a bunch of short articles on there called Interac Up Close, which is basically Interac employees telling you about both their lives and life at Interac, and it's pretty candid and pretty true. So I think I'd encourage you to look at that. It's the best sort of outside peek you can get inwards.
That's amazing. And if anyone who's joining us tonight virtually wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way they could do that?
LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll link your LinkedIn below in the chat.
Yep.
That's for me. I know we're almost out of time. Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Sharing your insights. I know this is incredibly helpful for our community and everyone joining. So a round of applause with our little emojis here for Keith.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.